Hello, my name is Martha. I graduated in 2019. Prior to grad school, I started as a bilingual service coordinator at Los Niños Services in early intervention. I'm now currently a forensic social worker at Legal Aid for the Juvenile Rights Practice Division.
And I am Maria Ortiz, LMSW. I like to throw that in there. And I graduated from Fordham in 2014. Focus B, so that was community organizing and leadership. And while I was attending here, I was a CPS worker at the Administration for Children's Services. I did that for 10 years. And now I'm currently working at the Legal Aid Society as a forensic social worker. And I also serve on Community Board 4, Manhattan Community Board 4, which covers Chelsea and Hell's Kitchen.
Hi guys, so this is, pretty informal. We have just a PowerPoint presentation just to kind of use for reference, and if you guys have any questions throughout, feel free to ask. Like it was mentioned before, I did my first internship placement.
Wait, first I have to say, because I always think it's important, everyone who's sitting here, thank you for being here right now, okay? I think that's always important to thank the audience for being present. Okay?
So yeah, I think I didn't know what forensic social work was until I was placed at the Legal Aid Society my first year, and I absolutely fell in love with it. We'll learn about it a little bit more, but I like the different interactions that we have with the attorneys and the involvement that we have in the whole court process. So that for me was basically what sold it right off the bat, and that's the only place I applied to right after graduation, and I got it. So it has to be something that you definitely enjoy or are interested in.
So first we're just gonna go over what forensic social work is a little bit, and then I guess we can talk about our experiences and more about how we ended up where we are currently. Okay? I do not like to read from the PowerPoint, so you can see what it says. And I think the most significant thing is that forensic social work is very different than any other probably field of social work. That's my personal opinion.
I think also the experience that we have is in the Juvenile Rights Practice Division. So that means that we're working with child protective cases and delinquency cases. So that's what we're going to speak to the most. But there are also, at least for legal aid, they have forensic social workers for criminal practice as well as civil. So everyone kind of has like a different hat on in different positions within the court. So in the juvenile justice practice, what we're doing is we're conducting interviews with children that have been either neglected or abused. We have interviews with children that have some kind of a delinquency case open in family court. And I think all of that kind of is interesting because we also have to then have the legal training, right? So I just finished a 2.5-week legal training where all of these legal terms were thrown at me. So it is definitely a steep learning curve, but if you're interested in it, it's definitely something that you can get. As far as the attorneys in our office, some of them are pretty easy to work with. The older ones may be a little bit more difficult because they're kind of stuck to doing things a certain way, but in general, at least in our office, I would like to say that everyone's pretty open to having a social worker. Do you have a question? Yeah.
Sorry if I'm jumping a little bit. But like the same way you need legal training, do you work with the attorneys as far as like their social work skills and how they talk to people and approach?
That's an excellent question. And I don't think they really get training around the things that we do. But I know that they do have to attend trainings. The initial trainings, they combine the attorneys. So I began in December, and there were trainings that I had to take with attorneys and social workers that were also geared towards social workers, which I think is useful. There are many attorneys, though, who have, I call it social worky skills, and are really good with the clients. The other thing I just wanted to add is that so at Legal Aid, we have 3 divisions. There's the juvenile rights practice, the criminal division. They call it actually, that's the actual term. JRP, CDP, so the criminal rights division, and then they have civil practice, which I think is really fascinating in the fact that we as social workers can move around and do things related in civil court, which would be like housing issues, issues related to Social Security benefits, things like that.
But to jump back to your question, I've had a conversation with the person who's in charge of training, and they're working to have one attorney and one social worker conduct all future training so that we have not only the attorney perspective and all the legalities of everything, but also the social work perspective, which I think is super important. Because right now, the attorneys don't have as much training as we do that are social work related. They do have trainings on like how to interview, but even then, you know, it is better to have a social worker in the room to kind of give their perspective on all of that. So this is kind of what we just talked on. The attorney, we work in an interdisciplinary approach. So we like to collaborate with one another. We work with attorneys, paralegals, and investigators. So depending on the case, at least in our practice, the attorneys don't always refer to a social worker. So depending on the severity of the case or what's going on in the case, they can refer to a social worker for long term, or they can refer for a short term. Maybe it's just for an interview or something with a child that has special needs, or with a sex abuse case. I think it depends, again, on the attorney whether or not they'd be willing to collaborate with a social worker in this case. And I think this also says a lot to, I mean, me jumping in and learning how different attorneys work. You kind of have to be able to advocate for yourself and advocate for the child, saying like, hey, this is a pretty heavy case. You might want to put a social worker on it. The child has a lot of needs, or the family has a lot going on. Being able to really assure that the attorney can maybe delegate some tasks a little bit better to better advocate for the child in court.
Is there a standardized system for when an attorney meets with a client to see like, oh, they have this situation or they mentioned X, I need to bring a social worker in? Or is it really like based on the attorney to decide if he wants to, or is it more standardized?
That's a good question also. I would say it's more standardized because it depends on the case. And sometimes it is about what a child says, but that's not why they would refer somebody. They might pull you in to an interview based on what a child is saying, but it's more standardized. So any case that has, for example, sex abuse allegations, there's usually a social worker assigned. But I think I would also say it does depend on the attorney as well. Martha?
I would definitely say that it depends on the attorney. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, like the older ones are a little bit more difficult to kind of get for them to refer to a social worker just because they've been used to doing it a certain way. But we've also just got like a brand new set of attorneys coming in, and they're super eager to work with the social workers, which is pretty exciting because, you know, I think it's better to have two people on a team, someone who's able to kind of have that conversation with certain clients that may be difficult for an attorney to have. Right? Yes?
Is your work only done in family court?
Our
Ours
practice, yes,
specifically,
but there
yeah.
it is. We also have another division in criminal court. So I think what we do a lot of is like the attorneys, law students, paralegals, like even if we're not on a case, right? Even if we haven't had a referral, an attorney will always like drop into our office and be like, hey, I just need to process this with you. What are your thoughts? What do you think? Do I need a referral? How do I go about having a conversation with the parent or the child? And the same goes for, I guess, paralegals. And then I think something super underrated here is members of the public, right? Because, yeah, that's generally everybody, right? But a lot of our clients that are coming in have no idea how family court or how the court process in general works or functions. So you're then explaining the process to them as best as you can in legal terms and in terms that, you know, like a 6-year-old would understand. You know, it's very difficult in that sense. But and then of course there's also whether or not you can speak with the parents, because the parents have their own representation. So there's a lot of lines that some can be crossed, some can't be crossed, and learning what that is in court. Do you have anything else to add to that?
No, the only thing I was thinking is that I feel like the bulk of this, what my function really is here in this area with attorneys, law students, somewhat with paralegals, and definitely the juvenile justice system or the family court system. And if you're into meso and macro practice social work, then it becomes more about legislators, which is something that I find interesting. I don't do it a whole lot related to child welfare, but I think that we as social workers and doing the work that we do, we have a lot of influence and say to influence what legislators are going to be deciding on. And I think that's important for us to be, more involved in that kind of thing.
Because at the end of the day, like, we are on the ground, we are doing the work, we conduct home visits, we go see kids at the hospital, we see them at the shelter, we see them wherever it is that they're at. If it's a residential treatment facility, like all the way up in, where are they? Pleasantville. They're really far. So those are the visits that we do in order to see the children, and for legislators to kind of know, hey, look, this is what's happening. You're implementing this, but this is what's actually happening at these facilities or at these centers. So that's another kind of branch where forensic social work can go. The first one is assessing and making recommendations. So whenever we are interviewing a client, we're constantly assessing their mental health. Like, is this person, sometimes it'll get an inability to testify. Like right now I have a client who's 14 years old, and you even just bring up the allegation and she'll start to tremble. Now, then in this case, we are then asked to either write an affidavit or testify on behalf of the child at some points, if that's what it gets to. We do want to be able to assess the client at that time and say, hey, this person is not able to testify because she shakes, she starts crying, she's irritable, she gets angry, like all of these things that you're learning in school to kind of read someone's behavior. You're then kind of deciding this person can or cannot testify. Recommendations. If we have a client who just came in and is then saying that they've been sexually abused and they haven't been put in any mental health services, you are then making that recommendation or that referral for this child to go out and receive the mental health services that that child needs. And then assessing, diagnosing, and treating criminal. Like, I know we have a social worker that just came from criminal court, and she was diagnosing some of her clients. Mm-hmm. So that was, again, like another, I guess it was basically a mental health report that she was writing up.
Yeah, she came from the criminal division.
She was writing up biopsychosocials and all that stuff. So it depends, again, on like where you're in court. So we're in family court, so I think that makes it a little different. The way that we like to explain it to our kids are basically like, in criminal court, someone goes to jail. In family court, no one goes to jail. So we're basically doing damage control, trying to make sure that the child gets what they want, the family gets put in the services that they need, and assessing how it's going throughout the duration of the period in court. Does that make sense? Okay. And then sometimes we are put on as expert witnesses. We have another coworker who just got put on like 2 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm. Was she put on as an expert?
Yeah, they called her an expert. So once you're called an expert, you're forever an expert in whatever it is that you're testifying in. So for her, it was a child protective case. Mm-hmm. So now she's a child welfare expert.
Which is so cool.
Which is crazy.
Yeah, they were going to put me on as an expert on a case, but the attorney needs to file a certain kind of document before that, and she didn't do it, so I wasn't considered an expert. And really the difference is, when you're on as an expert, you can add your opinion, right? And when you're not an expert, you can't do that. You can only speak to the facts of the case. So, forensic interviewing. This is my favorite part of the job. So I have experience being a CPS worker in Harlem for 10 years. And I did also take training on forensic interviewing, like a 3-day training, which was really interesting. And they also record you and give you feedback, which is really helpful. This can be rather interesting. One thing that I think would be more helpful is actually getting more training on this up front at Legal Aid, but you don't really get it up front. You have to kind of do the work a little bit and shadow people, which is also helpful to see different people and their style of how they do interviewing. So I will share that today I had an interview this morning, but it's actually about a custody case. It's actually custody. And that was rather interesting. And what I generally like to tell kids at this point when I'm interviewing them is actually, I'm a social worker, and what I do is I ask a lot of questions. And I also ask a lot of questions about how you feel. And then I talk about feelings, and sometimes I draw pictures, and sometimes I make faces, and just get that out of the way, sometimes up front. Today I did it in the middle, but it was really helpful. There were certain times during the interview he didn't want to share something, but I said, you can point to the picture, and he would do that. So that was helpful. Let me see what else I want to add to that.
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
I think it's also like reading the room, right? So when we're interviewing a 14-year-old, let's say, we can sit in a room where there's like a chair that wheels around or like toys sitting on the desk. If we're interviewing a 4-year-old, that might not be such a great idea because he's going to be spinning around, jumping around, running all over the place, playing with his toy, putting that one down, playing with another one. So making sure that we're also understanding like the developmental age of that child. Maybe they're 14, but they're not at developmentally that age right now. So we're the people who read those assessments and those reports prior to meeting with our client. Sometimes we don't have all that information, but and just kind of reading more or less how this person will present, the affect that they have during the interview. You're asking them tough questions. Like sometimes you're asking them about sex abuse, right? And you're talking to a 4-year-old. I had to do that 2 days ago, last week. And it's tough, right? Because you don't know how to bring something up like that. But a lot of the times they will be able to talk about it. And then you have to respond in a way that you're not taken aback by it because then they're going to shut it down completely. You have to be able to read their affect, read their experiences, read what they're saying. So that part is tough, but I think the training that I got at Legal Aid was super helpful, but also being an intern helped a lot.
I was going to add that, I don't remember what I was going to add right now. Something about the interviewing. Oh, that there's a lot of techniques and strategies on how to interview a child during a forensic interview. I feel as though, we also had one recently, you were there, right, for the forensic interviewing, and I thought that was really helpful, the techniques and strategies that we were taught to use. Like you're assessing the developmental stage of the child in the beginning, you're getting their story, their narrative without interruption, and then you follow up with questions, and also building rapport in the very beginning, which, most of us are really good at. Let's see what else I want to share about this. I feel like I can share a lot about forensic interviewing, and I don't want to talk too much about this.
That could be
unless
its
you have
own
questions.
learn lunch.
Yeah. No questions about it? Okay. Yeah.
I guess depending on the case, are there requirements for parents being there, depending on the age? I mean, I know if it's an
Yeah.
allegation towards a parent, obviously that wouldn't work. But I wonder, just at least in my current setting, like if the child's under 18, we have to have a parent in a session.
So we work with attorneys in the Juvenile Rights Division, so we're working with attorneys who are, our clients are children under 18.
Okay.
So we represent them in court. So just as an adult would have an attorney and there's attorney-client privilege, right? A child has that right. And it can be interesting to kind of wrap your mind around, but they have that right to have an attorney and tell their attorney what they want disclosed to the court and what they don't want disclosed to the court. So we cannot have a child in the room. A parent in the room, I'm sorry. And when a parent is in the room or anyone else, the attorney-client privilege is gone, okay? But that was a good question.
And yeah, like that's what the next slide is on. And honestly, that was probably the toughest part of being in grad school. You're like, you guys are mandated reporters. Like that's what you are. That's what you will always be. At Legal Aid, you are not a mandated reporter because you do have that attorney-client privilege that the attorneys have with the child. So that's really tricky sometimes, right? Because sometimes a child is disclosing something to you that in your heart you want to like yell it out and make it stop, but technically you cannot. So the way that I start our interviews are kind of like, I like telling little kids that they're my boss, right? Because that's technically what they are. They are my clients, but like I am there to represent them in court with their attorney. So I get all of the information that they provide to me under confidential interview, And then at the end of the interview, I kind of go over all the things that we've talked about, and I ask individually, hey, we talked about this. Can I bring this up to the attorney? Can I tell the attorney this? Can I? The judge, I'm sorry. I'm going to share this with the attorney. Can we share this with the judge in order for the judge to know what's going on here? Sometimes they'll say yes, sometimes they'll say no. And if they say no, you have to respect that, right? Even if it's like a terrible thing and they're 4 years old, and then it gets a little trickier because we have suspended judgment. So if a child is under 6 years old, technically
6 years old and under, we can substitute judgment for them, the attorney.
Which gets very tricky sometimes, especially if the attorney is on one page and the social worker is on the other.
Yes.
So that's when we would like to have case conferences and bring in all the information that we have and kind of just sit down and process it together, again, collaboratively, so that we can really come up with a decision of, okay, we think that this is what's best. I think what's also really important to say about working for legal aid is that our end goal is always reunification. So whatever happens, the goal is to really have the kids back with the parents. But prior to that, make sure that the parents have all the services in place that they need to help them be the best parents that they can be at the same time that the child's getting all the services that they need. So yeah.
One thing that's really interesting, I don't know if you'll understand what I'm saying or feel what I'm feeling, is that one thing about being at legal aid, and I think that is an adjustment, Martha and I were talking about it, the fact that we're not a mandated reporter, and I feel as though my perspective was a little bit different because I was a CPS worker for a long time. When I came in and I did the interview and they said, well, how do you feel about not being a mandated reporter? And I was like, yes, because sometimes I feel that, it's just my personal opinion, that sometimes I feel as though when we're calling in a case on a family, we're not always helping, right? Do you feel that way?
Yeah, that's why I left. I spent a year and a half.
Oh, I thought you were still there.
No, a year and a half.
Oh, and then you
Yeah,
left.
and I
Okay.
left.
So, and being on this side of the aisle, I feel as though I can really help families more. And I feel as though I'm empowering children and giving them voice in court, which is a good feeling, especially when I'm in the room. And that's my favorite part about being a forensic social worker, when I'm sitting in the room and interviewing a child and being able to be fully present and giving them, what's the word I'm looking for?
Autonomy.
Yeah, and yes, and being able to see them. And being seen is really, really significant and important. I mean, we as adults desire that, right? And being a child and being able to have someone, an adult, see you and understand what it is that you're saying and how you're feeling, I think is really important. And I've had quite a few stories already where I'm interviewing a child who wasn't open. I didn't have a rapport yet. And then I knew when I got it because their body language changes and it's different, including today. So we were literally sitting on this side of the table, the attorney and I, and the child was here. And by the end of the interview, he was standing here between us. And I was like, yes. And I've interviewed him before, but that's when I feel good. And by the end of the interview, him being able to share about how he really feels about something that maybe doesn't feel pleasant to talk about, and saying that, well, how do you feel about having visits with your dad? And him pointing to happy and then sad, and also pointing to mad, that he feels like his dad gets too upset with him during the visit. So, and him being able to share that comfortably. I'm not sure if I'm saying the word right, comfortably, right? And then how earlier in the interview he was uncomfortable talking about it. And you can tell from their body language, or they're changing the subject, just like we do, right? Change the subject, or they hide under the table, or they start looking at the, he actually literally went up to the wall and started looking at the wall. But that was okay. We got to where we needed to go.
That's the next one. Oh, are there any questions about everything that we just threw at you? Because there's a whole lot of stuff we just said. Yeah.
Are you guys assigned an actual caseload of clients to work with? And if so, how long do you family? Like you mentioned that you interviewed this child before, so that wasn't your first conversation. Right. So how does that process?
I think I think it varies. So the duration of how long we're going to stay on a case, it depends on the case, right? So like,
That was a nice answer, a nice PC answer, but I will say these cases in family court can last for years, okay?
yeah, I mean, I was gonna get to it. I was an
But it's true, though,
intern.
it does vary.
I
'cause
was
you
an
could be on a case for 2
intern.
months.
Yeah, an example.
true.
I was an intern my first year of grad school, which was now 3 years ago. 3 years ago, I started with this case. I came back, and I still have that same case. That case is still mine, right? And then I had another case that I opened with one attorney, like in June. I closed it out last week. Now, closing it out does not mean that the case is closed. It means that it no longer needs social work services. So at the time that I was put on the case, she had been found shoplifting at Century 21, and there was like a whole bunch of paperwork involved, and it was up in the air whether, like, as to whether she really did it or didn't do it. And then they were saying that she did do it, but she said the only reason that she would is because ACS wasn't giving her allowance to buy clothes to go to summer school. So once that was resolved, she continued going to school. She was in all her services. She was put in tutoring. Like, everything was going pretty smoothly. And at that point, it was like about a month that everything was going pretty smoothly. So at that point, it was just, okay, well, at this point, the attorney will keep the case. If something else comes up, you can re-refer it to me. But as of right now, there's nothing else for me to really do on it. So it depends. And caseload-wise, I don't know how. I think it depends on the social worker too.
Yeah, I think so. I think it depends on the social worker whether or not they're closing a case, right, quickly. But I was going to add that in terms of caseload, I have about 40, more or less, and I started in December. And I've been able to close a few, but it's also, from what I hear, when it comes to juvenile rights practice at the Legal Aid Society, Brooklyn and Bronx have the highest caseload, which makes sense because actually Brooklyn and the Bronx have the highest CPS investigations, right? So they're going to file the most Article 10s. And for me in particular, the work that I do, like, I have a better quality of life. It's not really, I don't feel as though I'm necessarily overwhelmed in the way that I was when I was a CPS worker. But I'm doing very similar work. And I'm also not, you know, when you're a CPS worker, you're the first person sometimes that is being called about something. When you are the social worker on a juvenile rights case, it's different. So even if there are some social workers who have a higher caseload, maybe 50 cases, and some days the work can be a lot, and some days it's not so much. I think there's a good balance,
It also,
a good quality of life.
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But it also kind of depends on, you can have like 50 cases on your caseload, but you're not working on all 50 every week. You know what I mean? Like, it is in rotation. So like, depending on when a court case is coming up, like, I know that I have things to do leading up to that. And then another thing within court is that like dates are pushed so far out that sometimes you don't see the kid in court for however long. So then it's once every 3 months, right?
That's supposed
For the
to be
attorneys.
how often
For the attorneys.
are seeing children.
Yeah. But I like doing home visits. I like going to like see the kid wherever he or she is. I love it. It's probably my favorite part. That's probably a large portion as to why. Yeah. But I do enjoy it. I think it's better to see them in their environment. But yeah. Any other questions?
You can tell my reaction. I was like, I don't know if I agree with that. Sometimes, you know, they're at home, and because I think it's my CPS experience let me know that it informs me that sometimes it's really not always the best thing to see them in their home when you interview them. But I think seeing them in their environment is good. Other questions? For clarity?
I know we
Some
said a
of-
lot.
Yeah, some of the questions that I'm getting, I feel like maybe we weren't clear about certain things, or we need to inform you more about what it is we do.
Career path-wise, where do you see yourself going? Like, do you see yourself staying within forensic social work in the capacity you do it now, or is there something kind of?
Who's gonna take this first?
I'll go first.
Okay.
I just started, right? So I think I want to stay here for a little while longer. I'm going to say this out loud, but I've been stuck in between going to law school or staying as a social worker. So I think that's kind of still up in the air, which is why I think forensic social work was so attractive to me. You're in court. you are on the record a lot of the time. You are seeing your client. You are working collaboratively with the attorneys. So I don't know. I still haven't figured it out. It's still kind of like in my head. But I do want to stay at legal aid for a little while longer. I love it, honestly. I knew it was where I wanted to go once I interned. Yeah. Go ahead.
Let's see, how much do I want to say or not say to that
Or
question?
maybe even not even you, but just like colleagues, like, do you tend to stay in a clinical role where you're working one-to-one, or do you
I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I'm a little sick. Maybe not even what you guys tend to do, but what you see colleagues do, like what career advancement is like.
That's a good question.
Some people are doing both. So some people are doing like their clinical hours part-time because legal aid doesn't, it's not a clinical position.
Right.
So we don't get our clinical hours there, but some of the people in other boroughs have definitely done their clinical hours part-time and worked at legal aid.
Can I just, so I have a question for you ladies and gentlemen. How many of you plan on getting your C? Oh, okay. And how many plan on getting the L? Everyone should be raising their hand in the room? Okay. My goal was really never to get a C. If I had the opportunity to, and I had supervision in order to do that, I would, but that hasn't been my desire. My desire was never to become a therapist, but when I was here, I think I'm going off track. So if you wanted to say something else.
Yeah.
Take it off track? Okay. When I was here, I graduated in 2014, and I was Focus B. That doesn't exist anymore, right?
I was the last year that they did Focus B last year.
And what were you, Focus B as well? Yeah. So Focus B was community organizing and leadership. That was what the title was, right? So for me, and it so happens that in my last year here at Fordham, I ended up on my community board, which serves Chelsea and Hell's Kitchen. So I still serve on community board 4, but now I'm also co-chair of Housing, Health, and Human Services. And I let them know yesterday that I'm willing to run for secretary. So that means I'm an even higher position on the community board, which is kind of cool. And it's great for networking. It's great to learn about how government works on a local level. You also get to meet elected officials, which is
Basically,
nice.
Maria's going to be an elected official at some point in the future. Keep an eye out.
That would be amazing, but I don't know if I want to do that. But at any rate, yes.
How does one work at getting their C's while working at legal aid at the same time?
I know about 3 people that are doing it, all in different boroughs. I'm sure there are more, but they've really just done a few hours here and there. So for one coworker that I know, it's taken her 3 years.
You have to do it outside of.
You would have to do it
Work.
outside. So you'd have to basically
evening.
find your own practice somewhere and ask if they would have someone to supervise you and do it that way and keep track of your hours. But I do know someone that started doing it when I was an intern and is finishing up, I think, in January.
So basically having 2 jobs at the same time.
Well, yes.
Yes.
But someone
the
I
answer is
know
yes.
who works at ACS currently, in order to get her C, she's fitting it into her schedule, and she facilitates meetings, but she fits it into her schedule. So if she can see someone during lunch in the community, with the clients that she works with, doing it on the weekends, and she goes to their home and provides therapy. The
There are
geriatric
ways.
population. If there's a will, there's a way. If you really want to do that, you can do it.
Yeah, but legal aid does not provide C hours. Sorry, guys.
It looks like
I was
about half of the
thinking about it.
classroom raise their hand for that, right?
Is there anything else?
So my question is going back to what you said about possibly pursuing a law degree.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand that in the role of a social worker, you do a lot of advocacy, and like you said, you tell the child that you're my boss.
Mm-hmm.
So how would your role differ between the position of being a social worker versus if you actually have your law degree?
I have a very specific path. Like, if I were to go to law school, I would not practice law. I know that. I don't think I'm the kind of person that would be able to go up in. So a little bit of backstory. The reason why I'm thinking about this is because the union that we are part of at Legal Aid pays for a majority of law school.
That's right.
$11.99.
Pays for a majority of law school. It is night school, and you're working still full time for legal aid as a social worker. And it'll take about 3.5 to 4 years, which I'm still trying to wrap my head around, right? Because I just finished all this. I have a life again, you know. It's hard. So I'm still thinking about it, but I personally think that I would just like to have the legal background and the knowledge that would help me be a better advocate. Not that our attorneys don't have like all the knowledge, but I think having that dual degree is incredible. You have like the empathy that every social worker needs, and you have all the laws, regulations, legislators, all that stuff from what you're taught in law school. So combining that, I think, would make you an even better advocate. And long term, I guess to answer the question that you had asked, I think I want to be a director of I want the title of director. Where? No idea. Director. That's where I'm at right now.
How much experience would you say you need to be able to apply for a forensic social worker position? Like, do they require 5 years experience or something, years experience?
That's a good question.
So I think it's 2 years of work.
Oh,
right?
is it?
I believe it's 2 or 3 years, and your MSW. I was happy enough that my internship helped me a lot getting into that. So if you guys are still looking for your placements for next year, some of your first year or part-time students, definitely speak with your advisor, because I was very adamant about how I wanted to do forensic social work. And there are many different organizations similar to Legal Aid that do kind of the same work. So I think you'd be willing to find it, and then that will kind of get your shoe in the door.
What year are you in?
I'm a specialist.
I don't know what that means.
Oh, you guys have a different, okay.
Oh, because I was going to say you can also just look online and see what it is that they require for the position. I don't recall. I don't remember.
I think I believe it's 3 years. I could be wrong, but yeah, I'm sorry. We should have looked that up before we got here. My bad. Got it.
So are there any other last questions that you have? You're good? I'm good.
All right.
All right,
Thank you,
thank you.
guys.